I think you either have to, one has to have a set standard for both sides and be... I'm going to back the blue team, I'm going to back...
UK in a...
The nude.
The former presenter on GB News. Alex grew up in Gloucester and she's also worked as a local journalist for ITV and BBC Wales. And Enver Solomon is the Chief Executive Officer of the Refugee Council. He used to be the CEO of the charity Just for Kids Law. He's also worked for the National Children's Bureau, the Children's Society, the Nardos and the Prison Reform Trust. And before that, he was a BBC journalist. On social media, Enver describes himself as a proud Mancunian and internationalist. Halifax, please welcome your Any Questions panel. So let's get things going with our first, which comes from Christopher Greenwood. Hello, Christopher.
Hello, welcome to Halifax, everybody. My question is, how should the UK respond to the Israel-Iranian escalation heard of today?
Christopher, thank you very much for your question. So, of course, a reminder that we record this programme live on a Friday night, and on Friday night the White House said a strike by Iran on Israel is a real and credible threat. If you're listening on Saturday lunchtime, of course, the position may have changed. That strike would presumably be a response to the airstrike that killed senior Iranian commanders in Syria nearly 2 weeks ago. So Christopher asks, how should the UK respond to the Israel-Iran escalation? Dan Jarvis.
The UK should respond mindful of the extremely serious situation the region finds itself. There is the real threat of direct military confrontation between Israel and between Iran. It's an incredibly dangerous development, and the international community must treat it with the utmost of seriousness. That will involve the United States, a range of international partners working alongside the UK and others, seeking to do what they can to deter Iran from attacking Israel through diplomatic means and through the use of back-channel diplomacy. If collectively the international community is not able to do that, there is a very real risk of a new deadly spiral of escalation that will only bring further devastation. And that has to be avoided at all costs. So the international community must do everything it possibly can to urge caution with Iran. But it must also do the same with Israel. The international community must be working together to ensure that Israel does not seek to further conduct operations in Gaza. Specifically, they should not launch an assault on Rafah. So this is a moment for calm heads. It is a moment, despite the complexity and the difficultness of the situation, for the international community to come together and do everything it can to prevent a further escalation of conflict, which nobody wants to see.
Iran and the US, it is widely assumed, don't want the situation to escalate, but Iran has made clear that it is likely to retaliate for those attacks in Syria. When you say the international community does need to do everything it can, what is that? What is that? We know David Cameron, for example, the Foreign Secretary, has spoken to his Iranian counterpart, but what is the message, Dan, that should be going?
Well, I think Iran will want to retaliate and Israel will respond in kind. I think this has to be a moment where the international community takes the opportunity to do everything it possibly can to try and prevent further escalation. I think when you're dealing with, and this is a slightly wider point, but it's highly relevant in the current situation, if, as Israel is at the moment, is dealing with a terrorist entity like Hamas, it needs to understand that Hamas, like other terrorist organisations, Al-Qaeda for one, are never going to be able to compete equally on the battlefield. What they seek is a strategic overreaction. That's what we saw in response to 9/11. There was a strategic overreaction from the US and supported by other Western nations to the attacks, horrific though they were, in 9/11. And there were horrific attacks that took place on October the 7th. But Israel has to understand that there will have to be an end to the conflict. The vicious cycle of killing has to be brought to an end, and we have to try somehow, difficult though it seems, to find the space where we can work towards a long-term, sustainable, peaceful settlement in the Middle East. That will be a very difficult thing to do, but it will require the leadership of the international community to do everything it possibly can to try and bring that about.
Andrew Stevenson.
Well, I very much agree with everything Dan has just said, and since the start of the recent conflict on 7th of October, British Foreign Secretary initially was James Cleverly and then Lord Cameron have done everything they can to avoid escalation of the conflict. There's been a lot of diplomacy, both publicly and privately, to try and deter any sort of violence escalating, this becoming a more widespread regional conflict. That is what we've all got to strive to achieve. We've got to ensure that the violence doesn't escalate. Far too many innocent people have already lost their lives. The pictures that we've seen on our TV screens since this recent upsurge in violence began have been horrific. We need to work every day in order to ensure that the violence ends and doesn't become a wider regional conflict.
I think clearly most people would accept that the thought of escalation in this region in particular, given how heightened tensions are and given already that just the level of death that has been seen, that people would want to avoid that escalation. But the question comes back to this point again, how? What is the role of the UK in that? What is the message the UK is or should be sending to Israel, to Iran?
Well, I think the vast majority of countries in the region do not want to see this become a regional conflict. They do not want to see escalation. Iran has played a destabilising role in the Middle East for some time. There are lots of conversations that go on with Iran, both publicly and privately, in order to ensure that these situations do not boil over and their influence doesn't become even more malign than it already is. I think we need to continue with that dialogue. We need to also keep that dialogue open with the Israelis to say, a wider conflict is certainly not in their interests, and it's why we have been pushing consistently for some time to say we need an immediate humanitarian pause, building into a sustainable ceasefire to this conflict, because there is no military solution to what is going on, and we have to, through diplomatic means, find a way through and avoid any further escalation and any further loss of life.
Okay. A reminder of Christopher's question, how should the UK respond to the Israel-Iran escalation? Ember Solomon.
Well, as someone who's of joint Jewish and Muslim heritage, what is going on in Gaza and in the Middle East really pains me. The appalling loss of life, the human catastrophe that is unfolding is absolutely horrifying, and I think there has to be every attempt made now by the international community to seek an enduring peace. We can't let this conflict escalate. And at these moments when you reach depths of great despair about just the level of death and carnage and human suffering, it can make you feel that peace is impossible. But then I think we just need to look at Northern Ireland. It's just over 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement was signed. You can achieve peace, and we simply have to stop the fighting, the war. The only way we're going to find a solution is by people reaching across what might appear to be intractable divides, but seeking to reach across in the way that happened in Northern Ireland. And the powerful BBC documentary I've been watching, Once Upon a Time in Northern Ireland, shows incredible human stories about the impact, the enduring impact it's having there. We can achieve peace in the Middle East, and the British government must do everything to try and achieve it.
And Ember, as we stand at this point on Friday night with the White House warning about this credible threat from Iran, with Israel saying it's ready defensively and offensively, with the talk of escalation or even potential escalation through miscalculation, do you think right now that peace is still within grasp, or does it feel further away?
Well, it's going to feel further away at moments like this, but we have to hold on to it, because look, what other solution is there? There is not, war is not a solution to the conflict. We know that. We know that from South Africa. We know that from the genocide in Rwanda, from conflicts all over the world. The only solution can be to seek an end to the fighting, an end to the destruction, an end to the death, and to find a peaceful solution.
Alex Phillips.
I mean, where do you begin with this? Because what's actually happening in the Middle East is a legacy conflict that's been going on for decades and decades and decades and decades. There's never been a solution to it. And it's interesting that this is the first question that's come up tonight. It doesn't surprise me. This, to me, seems to be one of the most propagandized wars in history. I've never in my own lifetime seen a conflict where every single move, every single offensive, who's responsible for getting humanitarian aid, and are we doing enough? Should we be selling weapons? Every single night, people marching in the streets, and this is all part of the game plan of both sides to win the hearts and minds and win the favour of the international community in this ongoing tug of war. The question tonight, actually, from Christopher is, what do we do in the face of this escalation? And the escalation has come about via what happened when the embassy in Syria was bombed. Now, was that America and Israel together? No one's claimed responsibility, but we're talking about Iranian retaliation here. And it's important to remember that Iran is actually behind the situation we are in now. Iran was the ones funding and training Hamas. Iran are the ones behind funding and training Hezbollah. They are the ones behind funding and training the Houthi rebels, creating carnage in the Red Sea, which is one of the reasons why we can't get humanitarian aid into Gaza. So we've got to be mindful that Iran are a very dangerous and hostile regime. And the big mistake we have made in the West in recent years, in recent decades, has been to forget this, has been to suddenly say to Iran, let's sit around the table, let's do trade, because actually that helps our economies, and I'm talking about France and Germany in particular. And guess what? It didn't normalise relations with Iran, it didn't make things better, it emboldened Iran. And so we've got to learn from the lessons of history that as much as you might think it's good and nice to trust and trade and hope that this leads to peace and progress, sometimes you've got to be a bit more sceptical. And the West has to learn from lessons of history where sometimes you reach peace through might. And I think what we need to do now in solidarity is make sure that we show hostile regimes such as Iran that they cannot and will not get away with constantly causing instability in powder keg regions. So we need to make sure we have a defence sector that is fully resourced, and we need to make sure we are geopolitically savvy, and we need to make sure as this conflict continues, we are aware of every single thing that's said on television, on radio, in Parliament, in protests, all adds to the propaganda that makes this even more complicated.
Let me ask you, when you say about Iran at the moment, you can't let Iran get away with this, what do you think then the action the UK and the US should be taking?
The action is what we're doing to some degree, which is the deterrent. You've got 3 big American battleships and a UK battleship now within the Red Sea, so if Iran tries to strike Israel directly with missiles, we have anti-missile interceptions that we can use, and it's about making sure that you are able to do that and say, if you dare strike, this will be intercepted, this will be blocked, this will be stopped. But when it comes to geopolitics and wider foreign policy, we've made a big mistake in bringing the JCPOA back on the table, the Iranian nuclear deal, when they've been proliferating uranium and they've not been playing by the rules, and somehow we thought by playing nice was going to make the situation better. It's made it worse, which is why we're on the brink of catastrophe.
Okay, I want to bring in our second question now, because it is a not dissimilar theme. You may pick up some of the points that Alex Phillips mentioned there. Our second comes from Chris Preston. Hello, Chris.
Hello panel. The Labour leader recently has said his government will increase the defence spending budget by 2.5%. This is along with a massive expenditure of renewing the nuclear submarine fleet. My question to the panel, is it right to put this before essential services, such as fighting child poverty, expenditure for schools, hospitals and the needs of desperate local authorities?
Chris, thank you for your question. So you're referring to comments by the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, as you said on Friday, when he said he did want to see 2.5% of GDP spent on defence, although he said as soon as resources allow, he wasn't clear what that meant. And I should be clear, actually, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has said the same, although he too has not given any time commitment to it. What do we make of this? Emma Solomon, right priorities?
Well, it's a great question, Chris, and I'm really pleased with the way you put it, because I couldn't agree with the point that you're driving at your question more. You know, my preference would be that we spend it on an education system that we're proud of, on an NHS that we're proud of, and that we bring the incredible large number of children, 1 in 3 children, I think, now, in the UK, in the 21st century, living in poverty. We should be doing everything to lift them out of poverty. And, you know, in my kids' school, in their primary school, they can't afford to have enough decent pens, markers, the kind of things they need in their primary school, the basic things that children need. That is what I think we should be spending government money on. And we certainly shouldn't be spending it on the Rwanda scheme. £500 million being wasted on a scheme on a scheme that's going to just create more mess, misery and chaos in the asylum system, and that is not going to deliver a solution.
What about the heart of the question that Chris was asking, which is about, is defence spending the right priority? Is spending on the nuclear deterrent the right priority? Particularly when, to the points that Alex Phillips was making, we are in an era now of global instability.
We are, and in an uncertain world, we need to have the right defences. We need to make sure that we have the armed forces equipped in the right way. But look, I'm not sure that Trident is actually what we need. You know, if you listen to people that work in the military, they question whether we've got our priorities right. Shouldn't we be looking at strengthening our conventional forces? You know, if you look what's happening in Ukraine, that is a conventional war. We need conventional forces, potentially, for what could break out in Europe. I'm very sceptical about Trident. You know, as a young person, I was a proud member of the campaign for nuclear disarmament. My father was, and I supported them. And I think today, spending money on Trident is not the best way to spend public money. We need the right army equipped to defend the country, but I don't think that's the right priority.
Dan Jarvis, I mean, this is quite a shift in Labour's position. In fact, Keir Starmer's making much of the fact that this is a changed Labour Party that is now prioritising defence and the nuclear deterrent. But what about those other areas, those public services that Chris was asking about?
Well, Chris's question is a clever one because it neatly highlights the difficult choices that any aspiring government has to make. He mentioned a number of issues that are particularly close to my own heart, fighting child poverty. I introduced a bill into Parliament to address child poverty. It was talked out by Conservative MPs. I completely agree with him on the importance of investing in our schools, in our NHS. I completely appreciate the fact that our local authorities simply don't have the resources in place to provide the services that they're required to provide. But at the same time, I think given the conversation that we've already had this evening, and an understanding that the world is more complex, more dangerous than at any point in our recent history, the first duty of any government has to be to keep the public safe, and our future economic prosperity and our ability to do the kind of things that Chris spoke about, to make sure that kids get a decent meal, to make sure that they go to a school where the roof isn't falling in, to make sure that local authorities are able to provide for issues such as social care. Our future economic prosperity also requires us to have national security and to be able to ensure protect ourselves as a country. That's why I think it's important that Keir Starmer has made a commitment to invest 2.5% of GDP on defence in government. But that isn't just an arbitrary offer. That is on the basis of a commitment to also look very carefully at what our defence and security requirements will be. So John Healey, who's the Shadow Defence Secretary, has already said that if we get a Labour government elected at some point this year, one of our first actions will be to initiate a defence and security review to look carefully at the nature of the threats that we face and the capabilities that we will need. Our armed forces are a great asset for our country. I was proud to serve for many years in them. They are the ultimate insurance policy, but the British Army is now the smallest it has been since the Napoleonic Wars. So I think it is right that Keir looks carefully at what we can do to invest in our defence, to make sure that we keep our country safe, but at the same time, we will never lose sight of those other priorities. But the two go hand in hand.
You recognise, though, that Keir Starmer, you say he's making a commitment to this 2.5% spending on defence as soon as resources allow, no time frame on it. He's also made a commitment to the UK's nuclear deterrent, which is very costly. He is making a choice, isn't he? He is making a choice in that, because we know the Institute for Fiscal Studies and others have said that all of the major parties have to be clear with the public. There will be choices made about where money is spent, and Keir Starmer's making a choice to prioritise defence spending potentially over those other areas that Chris outlined in his question.
I don't accept the premise of the question. I don't think he's seeking to prioritise investment in defence over investment in other areas of our economy and in public services.
Is he there being clear about where areas can't have money spent on them?
Well, I think what he has done today is show a clear commitment and understanding to the importance of the issue of strong defence, of underpinning our economy with national security, and also the importance of contributing to NATO. NATO is an incredibly important partnership arrangement that we are members of, and therefore it's right that we seek in a responsible way to make a contribution internationally. And being able to make a commitment to that level, I think, is an important and significant commitment. But that does in no way detract from the ambition and other areas of investment that we want to make. Our public services are not working in the way that they should. Nobody thinks they are. Nothing works better than it did in 2010. So we will also make sure that we prioritise investment to go into those services as well.
Okay, Alex Phillips.
Yeah, I think so far Ember and Dan have both made important points. Ember pointed out that actually what we haven't been resourced for are wars of attrition, which is what we're seeing happening in Ukraine. We've invested a lot in, well, not enough, some might say, in certain elements of modern warfare, and we are now being stretched very deliberately by our enemies in the giving of arms to Ukraine, something I wholly support, by the way, and we must continue to do that. But our enemies want us to be a depleted army, and Dan points out equally as well that we now have the smallest capability in our armed forces that we've had in a long time, and we live in a very dangerous era. Now, what you ask, Chris, is whether or not this should be a defence should be a priority budget. I mean, it doesn't work as simple as that, and I think when it comes to spending, it's not top trumps. Departments get huge chunks of allocated resources, and yes, you can increase spending in one and that might impinge a bit on the other, but it's not as easy as saying let's shift all of this money from this area to this area. And so you've got to balance all of your priorities and actually make sure that you're doing everything economically. And I think if we look at spending in the defence sector in recent years, it has not been spent well. And that is the problem we're facing. We have not been buying the things we need to buy to deal with the situations we're now facing. Some of the things we have invested in, such as the Ajax tanks that we rolled out, to the tune of a lot of British pounds, actually turned out really injuring the spines of the people who are supposed to be operating them. We've had a huge amount of clunking failures when it comes to how we were dealing with our defence budget, and massive overspending in areas we didn't need to, and massive underspending in areas that we did. Well, actually what's going on today is a wake-up call. And talking about Trident, which Enver picked up on, and him saying, well, I don't think it's necessary anymore. In many respects, actually, in modern warfare, people are planning to put weapons in space. There are hypersonic missiles being launched by our enemies. We are dragging our knuckles when it comes to our modern capabilities with arms. And Trident, Grant Shapps stood at the helm of the submarine, showing the world how great our nuclear deterrent was. It went about 100 meters and plopped into the oceans. That thing doesn't even work. So I think what we need to do is take a strong, hard look across all of our departments, whether it be how we're dealing with the NHS or how we're dealing with our defence budget, and say, what are we doing wrong? There needs to be some serious auditing.
Okay. You say that money's being wasted. We need to look at how it's being spent. But Reform UK has also committed to increasing spending on defence to 3% of GDP. I think it's within 6 years. How's that funded?
Well, that's because, well, there's various ways. And as I said, you don't just say, well, it's funded because this is done and that's done. One of our big focuses on the absolutely profligate waste of net zero targets, which is costing the taxpayer as much as 30 billion every single year. And that to us seems rather ridiculous when it's not going to move the needle when it comes to carbon emissions internationally.
I thought much of that was earmarked for the NHS.
Well, no, it isn't. No, in fact, the amount earmarked for the NHS comes to 17 billion of the 30 billion, so it leaves us a lot of pocket money to spend. But this is what I'm talking about national priorities and what matters in the here and now. And what matters in the here and now is we are living in a far more dangerous time. That is very apparent. So we do have to suddenly wake up and realise that we need an arsenal of weapons. We need a fighting fit, ready and well looked after, emboldened number of troops that we can deploy on the ground if need be. We need cyber capabilities. We need intelligence capabilities, because that is what it's like, unfortunately, in 2024. We also need to make sure that we can pick up the health service after COVID. So you have to look at the things which, frankly, come down to becoming luxury ideologies. And part of that is saying, well, it's all very well playing an important and world-leading role in the race for net zero, but actually, when you look at the contribution of emissions that the UK is making, at some point you need to say, well, look, do we need to take our foot off the gas in this sector and have a pragmatic wake-up call to the here and now?
Okay. Andrew Stevenson.
So I would say that defence is the primary responsibility of any government, and we need to support our brave men and women who fight for us to be supported properly and have the tools to do the job. I also believe that a strong defence saves you in the long term, because by having a strong defence you deter. And we are living in a much more unstable world. It is not just the conflict in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine. We are attacked in terms of cyber attacks on almost a daily basis, and we need to ensure the men and women who work for in our security services and our armed force have the correct amount of resourcing. That is resourcing that we need to put in. It is, of course, government is about getting the balance right. So, at the moment, we have more money going into defence, but at the same time, we have record spending on the NHS. So we've got to ensure that we get the balance right. And, I would say, it is definitely a commitment of my party to go for 2.5% of GDP when we are able to and when we can afford that. I would question, given, I know Dan is very good on these issues, but some in his party very recently have been espousing anti-NATO views, anti-nuclear deterrent. I would question how likely it is that a Labour government will deliver 2.5% of GDP on defence.
I will let you come back on that, Dan, but I want to put the point to you, Andrew. A lot of your colleagues are, as you say, making a lot of noise about wanting more money to be spent on defence. Even the Defence Secretary himself has said he wants more money to be spent on defence, as has the Chancellor. But we also know that after the Chancellor's most recent budget, the Institute for Fiscal Studies said public services are looking at around a £20 billion black hole. So what are the choices your government is making? Because you will know, people look at the NHS, at waiting lists, that would struggle to get a GP appointment, the points Enver was making about the struggles in schools. What are you prioritising here? Because you've got to make that choice.
Yeah.
And you've got to be honest with the public about it.
Yep, and since 2010 we've been very clear we've prioritised things like the NHS, record funding settlements for the NHS. At the same time, as in 2010, you know, we inherited a note saying there is no money left, and two
That was
unfunded
14 years ago.
two unfunded aircraft carriers.
14
So,
years ago.
yeah,
14
two
years
unfunded
ago.
aircraft carriers. We were able to fund the aircraft carriers whilst also putting up some money into the NHS. So I would say, you know, it's about balance, it's about getting the right choices. We've been able to support our armed forces whilst also funding essential public services.
Okay, Dan, in a word, to the point that Andrew's made, do you honestly think Keir Starmer's committed to 2.5% of GDP on defence? Can you make that commitment on his behalf here and now?
I do. I would also just very quickly make the point about investing in those who step forward to serve. It is an absolute scandal that armed forces personnel and their families are living in accommodation that is not fit for purpose. And if that is on your watch,
Snatch Land Rovers in Iraq, we're on your watch.
Okay, look, I'm sure that this conversation will continue in incoming weeks, but if you want to have your say on what we've been discussing, a reminder that you can phone Anita Arnon. The number that you need for any answers is 03700 100 444. Lines open at 12:30 p.m. on Saturday lunchtime. Do give her a call and let her know what you think about what the panel has been saying and share your thoughts with her. Right, let's move on to our next, which comes from Kate Bradley. Hello, Kate.
Hello. Given the harm caused by polarised views, as highlighted in the case report, what does government have, what role, does government have in protecting young people?
Kate, thank you for your question. So this is, of course, a question about the independent review of gender identity services that was carried out by Dr. Hilary Cass and reported this week. And one element of that review did talk about the toxic nature of this debate and the impact that is having on the young people at the heart of it and the services that are provided. Can I ask for your view on this, Kate? What do you think? Do you have experience in this area?
I'm a former further education tutor and I've worked with trans students. I understand that for each individual person it's a very personalised story, and I'm interested to hear views genuinely. I've got my own experiences, but I think policy comes from a more complicated level.
Thank you very much, Kate. So, given the harm caused by polarised views, what role does the government have in protecting young people? Andrew Stevenson, I mean, you're a health minister. Part of this policy area is directly.
Yeah, and I would agree with Kate in her question when she said, actually, you know, there's very different situations with children, and we need to ensure that everything we do in this area, children and young people at the heart of policy making. It is quite clear from this report, this shocking report, that quite often children haven't been at the heart of what's been done, and decisions have been made which are not clinically sound. And therefore, you know, NHS England, I was very pleased that they have taken immediate steps following the interim report. They are now taking immediate steps following this independent report. But I do think we need to all take a step back and reflect on the toxic nature of the debate. There has been a very toxic debate around this, where people who have asked legitimate questions have been shouted down and have been hounded out. And I think we all need to reflect on how we allowed that to happen as a society, because we lost sight of the children who are at the heart of this, and some of them have come to very real harm. So I think, you know, this is a moment for all of us, in politics, in the media, across society, to reflect on how we are able to have a mature and sensible debate about these issues, where we will have contrasting and conflicting views, but we can have those debates without being bullied, without being shouted down, without being no-platformed. It is essential that we have those debates and we ensure that further harm doesn't occur to children.
And would you give that same message to some people in your own party and the way that they've conducted themselves through the course of this debate?
Definitely. I think everybody across the spectrum needs to reflect on this and reflect the language that we have used in the past and how we go about this. We have to ensure that children and the protection of the children is at the heart of everything we do.
Okay, thank you. Emma Solomon.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Andrew, but when I think and reflect and I listen to politicians of different backgrounds, I really worry that actually they don't reach across the divide to have grown-up conversations, to seek solutions, that they actually too often seek to pander to the more radical elements of their own base, which then creates an unhelpful, toxic environment that Hilary Cass was very, very clear in her report is wholly counterproductive, and that only leads to individuals, in this case, young people, who legitimately were looking to explore their own gender identity. It means that they lose out. They get a worse deal, services suffer, even to the extent that professionals are worried about how to navigate it. Teachers, social workers, doctors. And that can't be right. And I do worry that politicians stoke toxic debates and don't seek to find solutions and reach across the divide. In my own area on refugees, the same happens. Marginalised groups get labelled, they get tarnished, unhelpful language, and it doesn't create the kind of conversation that we need. We need our politicians to actually do what Andrew says, but I worry that they don't do it.
Alex Phillips.
Do you know, Kate, I think you've asked one of the most important questions, not of tonight, but of the 21st century. What are we doing wrong? Where has safeguarding gone? What has happened to children? When I look at the statistics, this is an issue that's been very close to my heart across a range of subjects. When I look at children today, when I read some of the surveys that go on with young people's attitudes, when I look at the rates of suicide, in the last 10 years alone, the suicide rate for teenage girls, those actually not even teenagers, those between 10 and 16, it's gone up by 300%. And I think so there's an underpinning common denominator in all of this. And I'd say the one thing that's happened in the 21st century that we didn't have when I was growing up is the digitization of society. It is kids who are plugged into an increasingly algorithm-driven, polarized world. They have access to adult materials. It's a two-dimensional world in which everyone's avatarized. They cannot be the perfect Kardashian. They're being sexualized at a younger age because they're exposed to adult content. When I was growing up, porn magazines were behind an opaque cover at the top shelf of a newsagent, and it was some fuzzy picture of a naked person. Today, by the age of 8, 50% of children